Hello, and welcome to History Bytes. Today we're talking about one of the most famous planes of the Second World War, the Zero. The Zero was developed by Mitsubishi as a replacement to the Mitsubishi A6M in 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War, a conflict I've talked about a lot. China was a testing ground for Japanese planes, so an all-round improvement on the A6M, which was the current carrier-based fighter, was agreed upon. The two key factors that the Japanese were looking for in their new fighter was being able to take off of carriers as well as being manoeuvrable. As Japan brought itself into the wider theatre of the Second World War, the Zero would also prove itself to be reliable and cost-effective, factors that were crucial for the Japanese as the war turned against them. The design. So, the Imperial Japanese Navy, or IJN, set the target of what they wanted their new plane to be able to achieve, which was 310 miles an hour, that's 500 kilometers an hour, at 4,000 meters, and a climb to 3,000 meters in just 9.5 minutes. The plane was named the Zero, as it was the Type 0, named after the year it entered service, 1940, which ends in a zero. The Allied code name for the Zero was Zeke, as all Japanese fighters were given male names to make them distinctive and easy to remember. The speed and range of the Zero was crucial. With drop tanks, the IJN wanted the Zero to be able to fly for 2 hours at normal power, or 6 to 8 hours at the less fuel-consuming cruising speed. The plane's guns were to be reasonably light in weight, but pack a punch. It had the effective and versatile armament of two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns, a similar armament to many of the British Spitfires, which had proved themselves to be very effective in the Battle of Britain. British success in the air and the sea inspired the Japanese greatly, with their planes' armament being similar to British weaponry and their naval tactics, being similar to those employed by the Royal Navy against Italy in 1940. There was key differences between the Zero and the Spitfire, however, if we're using it as a comparison. The Spitfires were quite safe for pilots and easy to escape from if they were damaged heavily, and engine fires could be managed quickly. For the Zero, every weight-saving measure was taken, which made it quick, but easily destructible, with no self-sealing fuel tanks, making a fire a death sentence for any pilot. The Zero was far more manoeuvrable. It could outturn any Allied plane, and it had a radio set in each plane, making it very modern. The Zero was a very versatile fighter, being able to carry a pair of light 60kg bombs, despite the plane's small size. If you want more proof that the Japanese were heavily inspired by the British, however, have a look at these pictures. The one on the left is the Zero. On the right is the British Gloucester F5. They are incredibly similar in design. That is not a coincidence, especially since Gloucester, the designer of the British plane, had a relationship with the Japanese between the world wars. At war. When it came to combat, in 1941 and 1942, the Zero was unparalleled, achieving a kill ratio of 12-1. If we return to our comparison to the Spitfire, even the most modern Spitfires struggled against a skilled Zero pilot. The major advantage the Spitfire pilots had was their higher operational ceiling, granting them a height advantage. In a flat fight, the Zero often came out on top. The Zero first saw combat in China in September 1940, when 13 Zeros engaged 27 Chinese I-16s. The Zeros destroyed all the I-16s despite being outnumbered over 2-1 without taking a single casualty. The Zero's exceptional range meant that they could employ deception tactics, appearing at distant battles, making it seem like there were many more planes or Japanese carriers than expected, often confusing the Allied air and naval support later in the war. The Zeros were feared by Allied pilots, and with the RAF being trained in tactics that were excellent against German and Italian equipment, but suicide against the acrobatic Japs, as American Lieutenant General Chennault commented. While the Zero was not as speedy as the Spitfire, it could outturn it easily and stay in the fight for 3 times as long. The Allies developed their tactics, however, learning how to engage Zeros and attacking them from above, and in China, the famous Flying Tigers, a group of crack American pilots flying P-40 Warhawks from the heart of China, learnt how to engage Zeros with great success, despite having what was seen as inferior aircraft. At the battles of Midway and the Coral Sea, American carrier staff expressed dismay at the performances of their F-4F Wildcats against Zeros. Japanese pilots were also dismayed, however, at the survivability of American aircraft, with one Japanese pilot recalling that he poured 500 to 600 machine gun rounds into an F-4F Wildcat, and while the Wildcat was in no position to fight, the American pilot was able to escape and the US Navy plane never caught fire. The Japanese pilot admitted that the Zero would have become a fireball if subjected to such punishment. By late 1943, however, the Zero had really started to struggle against both the British in Burma and the Americans and Australians over the Pacific. The American Corsairs and Hellcats began to tear the Zeros apart with superior armament, pilots and altitude, and while the Zeros could still turn well with American fighters by 1945, in every other sense they were outmatched and mounted exceptionally high losses. Due to the collapsing Japanese economy and American pressure on the home islands, successors to the Zero were unable to be produced in large numbers. Over its lifetime, over 10,000 Zeros were produced by Japan. Overall, the Zero was a fearsome plane in its initial debut, becoming one of the most feared fighters in the whole world, but as time grew on, they could not handle the constantly evolving British fighters or the exceptionally powerful and numerically and technologically superior American fighters. If you want to see surviving aircraft today, there are many all across the globe in museums in the UK, the US, Japan, Australia, China, Germany and New Zealand. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on the A6M Zero. If you learned something new, press like and subscribe if you're new. Leave a comment on what you thought, and I'll see you next time.